I never imagined that a single dinner could change the way I saw my entire life. For years, I believed I had finally found a rhythm, balancing my career, my relationship, and the fragile dynamics that came with marrying into a family that never fully embraced me. I learned to smile through subtle comments, to swallow small insults, and to ignore the uneasy feeling that something was always brewing beneath the surface. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night at Joe's Stone Crab. What began as a celebratory dinner quickly twisted into something darker, something calculated. A moment so cruel and humiliating that it felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. And the person behind it wasn't a stranger, or an enemy, or even someone I had ever wronged. It was the woman who insisted she wanted to welcome me into the family. The woman who smiled at me with cold eyes when no one else was looking. The woman who had been waiting patiently to strike. I didn't react that night, not in the way she expected. I stayed quiet, steady, almost invisible. But inside me, a shift happened, a sharp, burning clarity. Because her betrayal didn't break me, it triggered something far more dangerous. And she never saw the consequences coming. So the real question is, how far would you go when the person who's supposed to support you becomes the one who tries to destroy you? Before everything fell apart, my life felt stable in a way I had worked hard to create. I wasn't chasing perfection, but I had finally reached a rhythm that made me feel grounded. My days were predictable but full. Early mornings with a cup of coffee in the quiet of my kitchen, long hours at a job I genuinely cared about, and evenings where I tried to carve out small pieces of peace for myself. I liked structure, routine, the sense that I was building something steady and lasting. When I met my husband, that feeling only seemed to deepen. We were different in many ways. He was outgoing where I was reserved, impulsive where I was careful, but we found balance in those differences. Marrying him felt like choosing a future I could trust. And for a while, it seemed like I had made the right choice. But marrying someone doesn't mean you automatically marry their family's acceptance. His mother, especially, always left me with a sense of being measured. Not judged openly, nothing ever that obvious, but quietly assessed, the way someone might examine a piece of furniture they're not convinced fits in their home. She had a way of smiling that never reached her eyes, a way of speaking to me that felt wrapped in silk but carried the weight of a blade beneath it. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. I told myself she was simply adjusting to the idea of her son's life expanding beyond her. I tried to be patient, gracious, and understanding. I made an effort, real effort, visits, thoughtful gestures, invitations to share parts of my life. And for a while, I believed it helped. She appeared warmer, more open, almost affectionate when others were watching. But there were always moments, small, fleeting, where I'd catch a glimpse of something sharper. A glance that lingered too long. A comment that cut too precisely to be unintentional. A shift in her tone when we were alone, and she didn't have an audience. I brushed these things aside. Life was busy, and it felt easier to keep the peace than examine every uneasy feeling. Besides, there were so many good things happening. My career was moving forward. My relationship with my husband felt strong. We were planning little trips, dreaming about a future home, talking about goals that once felt too distant to touch. I allowed myself to believe that whatever tension existed with his mother would soften with time. But tension doesn't soften when it's deliberately fed. Looking back, there were signs, small cracks that hinted at the truth I refused to acknowledge. Moments where she inserted herself just a little too forcefully into our decisions. Times when she'd express concern about my stress levels in front of others, using a tone that suggested she knew something I didn't. Or the way she watched me at family gatherings, as if waiting for a moment when she could expose some flaw I wasn't aware I had. Still, I kept suppressing my instincts. I wanted harmony. I wanted to believe in the best version of her, even if that version only existed in my own hope. But unease has a way of growing, quietly, in the background. It settles into the corners of your life and waits. And as I moved through my days, working, planning, striving, there was a part of me that sensed something was shifting, something subtle but undeniable. The energy around her felt different. Controlled. Calculating. almost expectant. I didn't know it then, but she had already begun shaping the moment she believed would finally put me in my place. The night at Joe's Stone Crab didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of weeks, maybe even months, of quiet planning on her part, carefully disguised as concern, as tradition, as family bonding. And while I walked through my routine, believing everything in my world was steady, she was preparing the one moment she thought would shatter me. Had I looked closer, maybe I would have sensed what she was capable of. Maybe I would have prepared myself. Maybe I would have seen the storm forming just beyond the edges of my calm life. But I didn't. I walked right into it, trusting that the world I had built was stronger than the intentions of one person. I had no idea that the betrayal waiting for me had enough force to shake everything I believed was secure. And even less idea that my response would shake her world far more. I should have trusted my instincts the moment things around me started to shift. At first, the changes were small, easy to dismiss as coincidence or simple misunderstanding. But looking back, every detail was a careful thread woven into a larger pattern. And the person pulling those threads had far more patience than I realized. It began subtly, with my mother-in-law inserting herself more deeply into our lives under the guise of helping. She insisted on scheduling appointments for us, sending reminders as if I were incapable of managing my own responsibilities. She called my husband constantly, asking him probing questions about our finances, our plans, even my work schedule. She'd show up with unsolicited advice, always carrying a tone that implied I was barely holding things together. And the strangest part was how natural she made it all seem, how effortlessly she painted her concerns as care. But her intentions became more obvious the moment she extended a sudden interest in my career. She began dropping comments about how stressful my job must be, how she worried I was overextending myself, how she hoped I wasn't hurting my husband by being so distracted. At first, I took it as her typical passive-aggressive commentary, designed to unsettle me. But then she started meeting with people I worked with casually, she claimed, offering unsolicited opinions about my work-life balance. The idea that she was stepping into spaces that belonged to me alone struck me deeply, but she always masked her overreach with saccharine sweetness. I told myself she was simply trying to be involved, but involvement doesn't come with the faint aftertaste of being cornered. It wasn't long before things escalated. My husband began receiving messages from her that framed me as struggling, burnt out, overwhelmed, emotionally distant. She painted me as someone on the verge of breaking, someone unstable and unpredictable. The irony was suffocating. I was thriving, moving through life with intention, building my career and my marriage with dedication. Yet she planted doubts like seeds, careful and quiet. The first time he hinted at her concerns, I felt a cold wave move through me. Not because he believed her, but because her reach had grown deeper than I realized. She had found a way to undermine me without ever raising her voice, and that skill was far more dangerous than open hostility. But the real turning point came when she suggested hosting a family dinner at Joe's Stone Crab. She claimed she wanted to celebrate me, a gesture so out of character that even I struggled to distrust it at the moment. She said she wanted to show appreciation, to build a closer bond, to step toward a new chapter. Her words felt rehearsed, but they were wrapped in the kind of sincerity that makes you question your own doubts. My husband was thrilled at the idea. He believed it was a sign that everything was smoothing out. He believed his mother was finally opening her heart. He believed so much that saying no would have made me look like the villain. So I agreed, hoping that I was misjudging her intentions. Hoping that maybe she was ready for peace. But peace doesn't come from someone who thrives on quiet chaos. In the days leading up to the dinner, she became unusually attentive. She sent me messages asking what I planned to wear, offering to help me choose something tasteful. She asked about my work schedule, subtly questioning whether I'd be too tired to enjoy the night. Each exchange left me unsettled, like I was walking into something I couldn't see. My instincts screamed at me, but I kept pushing the unease aside. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to give her a chance. After all, people change. Maybe she meant it. Maybe this dinner was her effort to bridge the gaps, to soften the friction. But the day before the dinner, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I received a call from a colleague, someone I trusted. They told me they had been approached by my mother-in-law, who asked intrusive questions about my performance and my stress levels. She implied I was falling behind, struggling to manage my workload, and potentially harming the team's productivity. She even hinted that I might be considering stepping back due to personal issues. I felt my stomach twist as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't a concern. This was sabotage disguised as sympathy. The colleagues sounded confused, almost uncomfortable, as they shared the details. They knew something was wrong. They knew this kind of behavior wasn't normal. And at that moment, I knew it too. My mother-in-law wasn't trying to connect. She was positioning me, weakening me, preparing a narrative she planned to expose at the perfect moment. By then, the dinner invitation no longer felt like an olive branch. It felt like bait. Still, I didn't cancel. Something in me needed to see where this was going. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious. And curiosity can become a powerful weapon when paired with quiet awareness. So I prepared myself, not for an attack, but for truth. The day of the dinner arrived with a tension I could feel in my bones. Everything felt too quiet, too controlled. Even my husband seemed unusually excited, unaware of the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. He kept talking about how this dinner would finally bring everyone together, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that unity was the last thing on his mother's mind. When we arrived at Joe's Stone Crab, the atmosphere immediately felt strange. She greeted me with an embrace so warm, so exaggerated. It felt like stepping into a performance I hadn't agreed to take part in. Her voice dripped with sweetness, her tone overly bright, her gestures rehearsed. She acted like we were lifelong friends, like she had never once looked at me with cold calculation. It was almost theatrical. She guided us to a private section of the restaurant, claiming she wanted intimacy. The table was beautifully set, the lighting soft, the ambience carefully curated. But the perfection of the scene only amplified the discomfort buzzing inside me. There were extra seats, guests I hadn't known were invited, extended family members, colleagues of my husband, people who seldom attended anything unless something significant was happening. It felt like an audience had been assembled, and that realization sent a slow chill down my spine. Throughout the early part of the dinner, she lavished me with compliments, over-the-top praise about my accomplishments, my balance, my strength. But every word carried an undertone that felt like the calm before something devastating. Her eyes sparkled with a sharpness she couldn't disguise. She was building tension, creating contrast, laying the foundation for whatever spectacle she had planned. And then it began. Slowly, subtly, with a softness so deceptive it almost sounded like compassion.
She started speaking about me. Not to me, about me.
She talked about how worried she'd been, how she'd seen signs that I was struggling, how she feared I was pushing myself too hard. She painted a picture of me as fragile, unstable, cracking under pressure. She spoke of late-night conversations with my husband, of her support, of her attempts to guide me through difficult times. Every word chipped away at the image of stability I had worked so hard to build. The table grew quiet. People exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some surprised. And as her words continued to flow, she slowly revealed a narrative I had never lived, but one she had meticulously crafted. A narrative where I was failing. A narrative where she was the hero. A narrative meant to humiliate me in front of the very people whose respect mattered deeply. I sat there, silent, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Not because I felt broken, but because I finally understood the depth of her intentions. She didn't just want to hurt me.
She wanted to dismantle me.
Piece by calculated piece. But as she spoke, something unexpected happened inside me. Not panic, not fear, not shame.
Clarity.
A sharp, steady clarity that cut through every emotion. She thought she was orchestrating my downfall. She had no idea she had just handed me the perfect opportunity for something far more powerful. She was revealing her hand. and she believed she was winning. But the truth was simple and more dangerous than she realized. I was no longer walking into her trap. I was watching her walk into mine. And what came next would shift everything. Because she hadn't just betrayed me. She had ignited something she could no longer control. The moment she finished her carefully rehearsed performance, the room fell into a silence so sharp I could almost feel it pressing against my skin. Eyes shifted toward me, some filled with pity, others with unease, a few with barely concealed curiosity. She expected me to crumble in that silence. She expected me to shrink, to defend myself, to look fragile and overwhelmed. She believed this was the moment she had been crafting for months, the moment where she would break me publicly, gently tucking away her satisfaction behind a sympathetic facade. But she didn't know what I had already prepared. I had walked into that dinner carrying the weight of her lies, but I had also walked in with something even she could never have anticipated. The truth. Not spoken from my mouth, but captured in her own actions. I had evidence, carefully collected, meticulously documented, and undeniably damning. And she had no idea that while she had been planning my humiliation, I had been planning her exposure. As the room waited for my reaction, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't fear. It was power, steady and unmistakable. I rose slowly, not abruptly enough to seem defensive, but with a calmness that cut through the tension like a blade. I could feel her eyes on me, searching for signs of collapse. But instead, she saw something unfamiliar: control. I reached into my bag and pulled out the tablet I had brought with me. The screen already loaded with recordings, messages, and documented conversations that traced every quiet step she had taken against me. Screenshots of her reaching out to my colleagues with fabricated concerns. Recordings of her layered insinuations, captured during moments when she forgot that masks slip most easily when she felt victorious. Notes and timestamps showing every attempt she'd made to sabotage my reputation behind the scenes. One tap, and the screen lit up with a compilation I had assembled. I placed it in the center of the table, turning it toward the people she had gathered as her audience. If she wanted a spectacle, I was going to give her one, but not the one she had expected. The first video played, the soft, honeyed tone she used while speaking about me to someone she believed would keep her confidence. Her voice carried through the room, exposing not just the words she spoke, but the intention behind them. Every lie, every manipulation, every carefully constructed accusation played out louder than she had ever imagined they could. Her breath hitched. I watched the exact moment her expression shifted, the faint crack in her composure, the flicker of panic that she tried to suppress, the realization that the narrative she'd spent so long weaving was unraveling faster than she could grasp. People leaned forward. Shock rippled through the group. My husband's face drained of color as he listened, hearing, for the first time, the truth that had been hidden beneath her layers of false concern. The warmth she had wrapped herself in evaporated, replaced with a cold, hard visibility. She wasn't the concerned mother anymore. She was the architect of a calculated betrayal. And then came the messages, the ones she had never expected me to see. Screenshots showed her crafting false stories about my mental health, suggesting I was unstable, implying I couldn't manage my life or my marriage. Her words glowed on the screen like sparks feeding a fire she could no longer control. As each piece of evidence surfaced, the room shifted. Sympathy faded. Respect deteriorated. The subtle admiration she once enjoyed among these people turned into a sharp, palpable disappointment. The woman who had always prided herself on her image, on being polished, respected, admired, was being exposed by her own voice. My heart raced, not with anxiety, but with a fierce clarity. This was not vengeance born of cruelty. This was justice, the kind that reveals truth in a way no argument ever could. I looked at her, and for the first time, she looked small. Not because I had diminished her, but because the mask she had worn for so long had finally cracked wide open. She reached for excuses, searching for a lifeline, but the evidence spoke louder than she ever could. Every attempt at justification collapsed under the weight of her own actions. The dinner she had orchestrated to destroy me had become the stage for her own undoing. But I wasn't finished, not yet. I tapped to reveal the final piece, a compilation of the consequences of her interference at my workplace. Meetings she had attempted to influence, doubts she tried to plant, colleagues she had approached with faux concern. Proof that every move she made was designed with precision to destabilize me. The room grew impossibly quiet. There was no going back from this moment. Not for her. Not for any of us. And in the middle of that silence, I felt the full weight of what I had done. Not regret, not guilt, but release. A liberation from the shadows she had cast over my life. A reclaiming of the dignity she had tried to erode.
She didn't speak.
She couldn't. Her own web had closed around her. My husband looked at her with disbelief, so deep it seemed to hollow out something inside him. And for the first time, he saw not the mother he wanted to believe she was, but the woman she truly was. At that moment, the tide shifted completely. The power she once held evaporated, replaced by a stark and undeniable truth she could never hide again. Her reputation, her carefully maintained image, her control, it all collapsed right there at the table. I stood still, feeling the finality of the moment settle around me. Not triumph in the loud, victorious sense, but in a quiet, grounded way. A sense of justice that didn't require gloating or explanation. A sense of strength born not from revenge alone, but from reclaiming my voice. And yet, as powerful as that moment was, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything that came next, because exposing her was only the first step. The real impact, the real shift, would unfold after that night. And she had no idea just how far-reaching the consequences would be. When the final piece of my plan slid into place, it didn't feel like the dramatic victory I used to imagine late at night. It wasn't fireworks or applause. It was quiet, eerily quiet, like the moment after a storm when the world holds its breath. I watched him realize what I'd done. Watched the confidence drain from his eyes as everything he built on lies and manipulation collapsed in front of him. I thought that moment would feel like justice. And in some ways, it did. But it also felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at what I'd climbed through, what I'd lost, and what I was never going to get back. People romanticize revenge. They frame it like a clean cut, a sharp, decisive act that sets things right. But the truth is far messier. Revenge isn't a single moment. It's a process, a journey through darkness that forces you to confront your own limits. And no matter how just your reasons are, you never walk out the same person as when you walked in. After exposing his lies and letting the truth burn through the carefully managed image he'd built, there was a strange stillness inside me. For months, his betrayal had been the drumbeat of my life. Every decision, every move, every sleepless night had been shaped by the desire to make him face what he did. And when it finally happened, when everyone saw his true face, I expected some part of me to finally exhale. Instead, that part went silent, almost numb. In the days that followed, I learned something about revenge that no one really talks about: the aftermath. People think revenge ends with the confrontation, with the downfall, with the moment the villain crumbles. But it doesn't. The aftermath is where the real reckoning begins. Friends who supported me started looking at me differently, not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet caution. They'd say things like, "I'm glad you stood up for yourself," or "he deserved it." But there was something behind their words, a recognition that I'd gone to a place they hoped they'd never have to. Some even asked whether it was worth it, though they always softened the question with a nervous laugh. I didn't blame them. I was asking myself the same thing. Revenge gave me closure, but it wasn't the closure I expected. It didn't erase the hurt or magically restore who I was before everything happened. If anything, it made me see the fracture more clearly. Revenge didn't heal the wound. It simply stopped it from bleeding. But here's what it did give me: truth. It forced everything into the open, stripped away illusions, and confronted the reality I had been too scared to face. And in that honesty, I found something surprising: strength. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from surviving. I remember standing in my apartment the night after everything unfolded. The lights were off, the city noise fainted through the window, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in the silence. No second-guessing. No pretending. Just me, alone, but not broken. For the first time, the quiet felt like a beginning instead of an ending. People assume revenge is about punishment. But for me, it was about reclaiming the parts of myself he tried to grind down, my confidence, my voice, my sense of worth. His betrayal made me question everything, made me feel small and foolish and disposable. But revenge reminded me that I mattered, that my pain wasn't something to be brushed aside or minimized, that what he did had consequences. Still, the deeper impact wasn't in what I did to him, it was in what I learned about myself. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it's the decision to walk away. Sometimes it's the decision to stand your ground. And sometimes, yes, it's choosing to fight back. But I also learned this. Revenge doesn't end with the other person's downfall. It ends when you decide it does, when you stop letting the past dictate your present, when you finally loosen your grip on the anger you carried for so long. I won't pretend the journey didn't leave marks.
It did.
Some days I still feel the weight of it. The choices I made, the darkness I stepped into, the version of myself I had to become to see things through. But I also feel something else now. Peace. Not the fragile kind I used to fake, but real peace, the kind that comes from knowing I didn't stay silent. That I didn't let him rewrite my story. Justice isn't always offered. Sometimes you have to carve it out with your own hands. And while revenge can't erase betrayal, it can show you the boundaries of your own strength, the lengths you're willing to go for yourself. Maybe that's why my story resonates with people. Because betrayal is universal. Hurt is universal. And the desire for justice, true justice, not the kind wrapped in politeness or excuses, is something so many of us understand but rarely speak about. So as I look back now, I see more than just the pain. I see growth. I see lessons etched into the hardest moments of my life. And I see a woman who refused to stay broken, who refused to let someone else define her future. And that brings me to you, the person watching this, maybe because you're curious, maybe because you've been hurt too, maybe because you're standing at your own crossroad wondering what to do next. If my story leaves you with anything, let it be this. Revenge can give closure, but only you can give yourself healing. Justice can bring light, but only you can choose what to do with it. And strength isn't measured by how loudly you fight, but by how honestly you confront your truth. So I'll end with a question, one I had to face, and one you may face too. When someone shatters your world, do you rebuild it with gentleness, or do you let the fire you walked through forge you into something stronger? Tell me what you think. Share your story. Because sometimes, speaking the truth is the first step toward reclaiming your power.